again. Welcome to today's webinar, Principles-Focused Evaluation, the newest approach to evaluating complex change efforts. And thank you so much for joining us. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's host for the webinar, Mark Cabaj. Mark is president of the consulting company From Here to There and an associate of the Tamarack Institute. Mark's current focus is on developing practical ways to understand, plan, and evaluate efforts to address complex community issues. He has firsthand knowledge of using evaluation as a policymaker, philanthropist, and activist, and has played a big role in promoting the emerging practice of developmental evaluation in Canada. Welcome to the webinar, Mark.
Thanks, Duncan, and hello, everyone. I'm excited to participate in the session today, and I'm happy, as always, to introduce Michael Quinn Patton. I do actually have a prepared script here, but I'm going to go off script and introduce Michael in the way that I'm really enjoying lately, and Michael's already heard it, but Michael, you'll have to hear it one more time. Michael is an evaluation prophet in the sense that, like any prophet, he jumps ahead of where the crowd is and sees things that are coming down the pipe or the pike on the journey forward, and he runs back to the crowd and tries to make sense of it and make it accessible, and then runs out and does it again once we've got a handle on what we might be seeing over the next horizon. And to that extent, he played a key role in mainstreaming, in many ways, qualitative evaluation at a time where quantitative evaluation was all the rage. He was there to help us understand the concept of utilization-focused evaluation. How do we design evaluations that have a higher chance of use? He was critical in the area of developmental evaluation, which is how to employ evaluative thinking in contexts that are neither formative nor summative, but actually developmental and adaptive, and created really arguably a revolution in the field of evaluation. He continues to do this time and time again. In fact, his most recent book on evaluation facilitation, I heard in Australia recently, that's one of the favorite books that has come out in the last year and a half in the evaluation field there. He's working on many, many other things, but today we want to focus on principle-focused evaluation, which is, once again, an example of going ahead and paying attention to how people who are trying to change the world and tackle complex issues use principles rather than logic models or theories of change, often to make sense of the world and guide their thinking and action. And Michael has confirmed that there's an evaluation implication of that. He's worked in countless different contexts, trained and supported literally tens of thousands of people. He's one of the greatest contributors to evaluation in the modern age. So, Michael, thanks for spending the time with us today. I know you've been traveling a lot and you're home in Minnesota today, but you've elbowed out an hour and a half for us. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you, Mark.
Michael, this is not our first time chatting about this. We did chat about this approximately a little over a year ago, maybe 15 months ago, shortly after the book came out on principle-focused evaluation. But we thought it was worth connecting again, because not everyone could participate in that call, number one. Number two, a lot of people have heard about it since, and so there's a bigger audience. Number three, you've been engaging with people for quite some time now on the topic, and you yourself have learned some things. So we get to spend about half an hour chatting about these things, and let's begin by having you remind us what's the essence of principle-focused evaluation.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that very generous introduction. What we found when Francis Wesley and Brenda Zimmerman and I did the book on Getting to Maybe, How the World Has Changed, and studied social movements, we found, as you said in your introduction, that social movements and social innovators were very problem-focused and operating in complex systems out of a set of principles rather than organizational trappings like logic models, even mission and vision. But they were deeply principles-driven. And that led to looking at what it would mean to evaluate principles. They're often stated in organizations or in programs, but they come out of a retreat, people write them down, but don't necessarily look at what they're doing with the principles. So principles-focused evaluation takes principles seriously, the most serious way to take them is to ask questions about how meaningful and are they being adhered to. So it becomes a unit of analysis for evaluation. It becomes an approach to action, innovation, and programming, especially in complex dynamic systems where you're having to be adaptive and change and follow emergence. Principles become the anchor, the rudder for navigating complexity, and it follows then that it becomes an approach to evaluation. If people are acting on principles, if they're meaningful, then we can evaluate them.
And given that we've chatted about this a couple of times, it might be worth pointing out something that has popped up in your conversations with people, and that is, it's not that principles and logic models and theories of change are necessarily mutually exclusive. It's just that principles themselves as something, the it that guides people has not had the attention that it deserves. So this is not an either or story, is it?
No, and it's very much a matching story, because there are situations in which logic models are premature. Some of the trappings of programs are like SMART goals are premature, and evaluators sometimes, if those are the only tools they have, force innovative programs to use those tools when it's really not yet appropriate to do so. So where social innovation has principles, we can deal with those without imposing these other kinds of tools on a program.
Yeah. Well, then that language itself, principles, is often loosely used, and so it begs the question: what are principles and what are they not?
So the way the book defines principle is, and we're talking about effectiveness principles. An effectiveness principle is a statement that provides guidance about how to think or behave towards some desired result, either explicit or implicit, based on norms, values, beliefs, experience, and knowledge. The principle, as a hypothesis, remains a hypothesis until evaluated within some context to determine its relative meaningfulness, truth, feasibility, and utility for those attempting to follow it. So that's elevating principles to say they guide us toward effectiveness. Let's find out how well they do that.
So again, a real-time example. I was just in a meeting the other day, Michael, where someone was referring to housing first as a principle. Using this description that you have here, do you think that's a hunch, or is it more than a hypothesis, or do you think housing first is a principle that has some evidence behind it nowadays?
I actually am working with programs that based on housing first. I just came back from Denmark, and their programs they're working on housing first, and I think that it's an example of taking a single principle and elevating it to the point where it's worth evaluating what the implications are, because there are other programs that are taking a more comprehensive approach to the needs of people. We have situations in the United States where getting people into housing means that they lose other services.
Right.
And that there can be a shadow side to housing. And especially there, that's not always the first problem that people have, if they're abused, if they're in trauma. And so there's a kind of mechanistic nature of housing first, which actually makes it a rule rather than a principle, because it's highly prescriptive and doesn't allow for adaptation and contextual variation. It actually becomes a rule rather than a principle.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, and particularly because in the work that I've seen you do on this, the opportunity of using multiple principles and understanding where they complement each other or where they create tensions is part of the evaluative exercise. But you did make the statement here, the difference between a rule and a principle, a recipe and a principle. Why don't you just reinforce that?
Yeah, so a rule or recipe is highly prescriptive. It tells you exactly what to do, and it's very useful in that regard. A stop sign is a rule. A recipe tells you exactly what to do. Principles, in contrast, provide direction, but have to be adapted to context. So for cooking, an adaptive principle is season to taste and situation, which means that you're going to get a different outcome with different meals for different purposes. Who's coming to the meal? What are their health needs? What kind of seasons do people prefer? And so rules are aimed at very precise replication. Principles are aimed at contextual adaptation.
Mm-hmm. That puts a lot of pressure on the person who has to interpret the principle.
Indeed, and that's where evaluation becomes important, is to find out what those adaptations are and what results from the adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
The only issue in evaluating a rule is whether or not it's followed. But evaluating a principle means that you have a wider variety of outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you've given a little bit of guidance in your book and spent a lot of time on it, and useful guidance on understanding how to even frame principles that are productive. Give us a little bit of an not an update, but a summary of the guide framework.
And this comes out of, as you just said, the understanding that evaluators not only use goals and principles as the focus of evaluation, but in fact we help develop them. When we got into goal attainment work, and I was there at the beginning 50 years ago, we thought we were just going to go out and evaluate goals, and we went out and found out programs didn't have goals or didn't have goals that were evaluable. And so the SMART framework emerged to specify what constitutes a goal that is actually evaluatable. And so the guide framework is about how to articulate goals in a way that they can be evaluated. There are 5 criteria that constitute a meaningful principle, that it actually does provide guidance. It can be used for decision making. It's inspiring because it's values based, developmental in that it can be used in different contexts, and that it can be evaluated.
Yeah. And Michael, I know that you, when you've written in the past, you've always been a bit cautious about trying to create aids for action that were too detailed because people just automatically take the aid and treat it like a tool. But you spent a lot of time on framing this guide framework. But why so much time on creating this framework where you may not have done that to the same extent in other books or other methodologies or ways of thinking about evaluation?
It's a great question, and part of it is when I was doing the book on principles-focused evaluation, and began looking at principles all over the place, programs, projects, institutions, governments, nonprofits, businesses. I found a lot of really, really bad statements, and also often found that books and articles that are titled principles don't have any in their content. And so it turned out that in order to evaluate principles, I was going to need to help people articulate what a principle is. And I found no book that does that. It tells people how to frame principles in the same way that when evaluators got into goal attainment, we had to specify what constitutes a reasonable goal. I really felt that I needed to help people frame principles so that they could follow their principles to a greater extent if they were actually able to be evaluated.
Yeah. And you just simply through using that lens yourself, never mind sharing with others, you've again come up with this guide. I don't know if you want to spend more time on this, Michael, before going to some examples of this, but you've got some examples of what principles, good principles are and what they are not. Did you want to spend more time on this slide?
I just highlight 2 things on this. Under the guiding piece, a a good way to know that you've got a meaningful principle is when you can articulate its opposite or alternative principle. So the housing first example that you used, what's the alternative to that? Well, one alternative is give priority to what people most need.
Right.
And so when you articulate alternative principles, then zero tolerance is a principle in many homeless shelters versus trauma-informed care, which recognizes that people won't always be beautifully behaved because they've been traumatized. So articulating alternative principles is helpful to know what you're doing. The other thing I would get asked a lot under inspiring is the difference between values and principles. And values are statements of beliefs, something I believe in, I care about. Principles are behavioral. So the way you get a principle is to take a value and make it actionable. Values are cognitive, they're beliefs. Principles are behavioral, they're action oriented.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. And I know when we did the series of workshops last year, a lot of people found this guide useful in turning their values into principles and saying now they're actionable. That's a real highlight of the book. But you've hinted on this. So when you're producing these principles, there are things that they are not.
That's right. They aren't just value statements. You can believe in something, but the question is, what do you do about it? They aren't goals in the sense that, as you saw with SMART goals, goals are something that you attain. Goals have time limits on them. They're operational. Principles are enduring, and they provide guidance, but they don't provide time-limited outcomes. And hopefully, they're not just empty rhetoric, that they really do provide guidance. An example of a very common principle that many organizations and especially philanthropies have adopted is do no harm. I find that to be relatively empty rhetoric because systems are designed to benefit some people and harm others. And anytime you're involved in systems change, somebody's going to be unhappy with that. They're going to experience that as harm. Even individually and in medicine, we rarely are in the position of doing no harm. What we have are trade-offs. You lose a limb to save a life. You have side effects from a drug in order to deal with some major problem that the drug is addressing. Life is a lot of trade-offs, and so even doing nothing can do harm. The notion of doing no harm doesn't actually provide guidance. And when in the context of the full Hippocratic Oath from which that's been directed, doing no harm is quite specific in the Hippocratic Oath. It means don't just play around with stuff when you don't know what you're doing. Don't just make stuff up. That's what doing no harm is in the Hippocratic Oath. So that to me is an empty rhetoric kind of principle that actually doesn't provide much guidance.
There's a lot of upfront work here, Michael, to try and to spend the time to come up with stuff that's not just meaningful amongst innovators, but truly shared and understood.
Indeed.
Yeah, but I think also that's where evaluation plays a role. You can only do so much upfront work, and the rest of it you learn by doing. You you say here's our opening moves on principles, and then you begin to experience things, and the evaluative process that you put forward is actually organized around questions that could be asked when doing principle focused evaluation. What are those questions, Michael, and why are there only 3?
So the questions I found all encompassing enough to ground an evaluation for principles focused evaluation begins by asking to what extent and in what ways is the principle meaningful to those to whom it is meant to provide guidance. Do they understand it? Do they buy into it? Does it help them make decisions? The second issue is the classic one of adherence. To what extent is the principle adhered to? Is it actually being followed? What does that look like to follow a principle? And this third one is really critical because people often think that principles are just about process, but in fact, they provide direction toward results. So the third question is, if a principle is adhered to what extent and in what ways does it lead toward desired results? And that becomes both process and outcome are embedded in principles. And it's important to look at both of those things.
Well, and I was just being flippant when I said, how come there's only 3? And because in truth, I marvel at how elegantly simple these things are. The answers to these things are complex, but the questions themselves are really really useful. You've seen so many instances in which these have been actively or implicitly applied. Give us some examples of what these principles look like in practice, particularly from an evaluation point of view.
Well, my favorite example until a month ago was this change from a rule to a principle by the American Academy of Pediatrics. In 1999, the American Academy of Pediatrics formulated a rule called no screens under 2. If you think about it, in 1999, there were only 2 kinds of screens, television screens and big computer screens. Now we've got all kinds of screens and devices with screens on them. So last year, based upon research and evaluation over 20 years, the American Academy of Pediatrics reframed no screens under 2 from a rule to a principle. And the principle is no screens under 2 without interaction. Now, no screens under 2 as a rule is absolute, no screens. But no screens under 2 without interaction is a principle. Obviously, that's going to have to be adapted to the age of the child. A 6-month-old, year-old, 18-month-old, 2-year-old is going to be different. What other kids are present, what's on the screen, what adults are present. But the overall guidance is don't use screens for babysitting. Don't just sit kids down in front of a screen. Make the screen a point of interaction, of engagement. And we know that's based upon child development research, but it's a beautiful example of how a principle then provides quite concrete guidance. It's possible to evaluate its meaningfulness to parents. Do they actually follow it? And the desired result is that interaction enhances child development.
Yeah. Michael, and it strikes me that it's also an excellent confirmation of principle-focused evaluation also being a learning-oriented approach, in that even though they conceived of it as a rule, in the very act of implementing it and looking at the results, they realized that the guidance had to be adapted.
Yes, that's a really important point. We see that a great deal in all kinds of areas, medicine in particular. You think about something like female hormone replacement. There was a time when virtually all women went on female hormone replacement. Then there became the cancer scare, and then nobody was going on female hormone replacement. And now the principle is that it's dependent upon your symptoms, your family history, and that the decision about going on female hormone replacement is an individual decision to be made in consultation with your physician based upon your symptoms, your tolerance for risk, your family history, and it's not one size fits all. It moves from rules to principles.
Yeah, that's just excellent. Great. And you said, Michael, you said this was your favorite until a month ago. What happened in the last month to make it not your favorite?
A month ago, the American Statistical Association put out a special issue devoted to moving to a world beyond P equal 0.05. Came out on 20th of March, 2019. And this is a game changer. Basically, this volume, which is available online, has a rule in it. The rule is they are banning the language statistically significant. They say never, ever use the word statistically significant. And they're very clear about it in big letters. Don't say statistically significant. And in place of the rule of 0.05 equals statistical significance, they have offered 4 principles for statistical analysis. 4 principles. moving from the rule that 0.05 means that something is statistically significant to 4 principles to guide statistical analysis. And those 4 principles are: accept uncertainty, be thoughtful, be open, be modest.
Wow.
Acronym is ADAM. Now imagine you take a statistics class, and the opening statistics day, the opening of the statistics class, the statistics professor says, what you're going to learn in this class is how to accept uncertainty, be thoughtful, be open, and be modest, because that's what statistics and statistical analysis involves.
Wow.
My guess is nobody on this webinar has experienced a statistics course like that, but that's precisely what this volume of the American Statistician is recommending, that these are the principles that guide statistical analysis. What I find particularly intriguing, and harks back to your introduction of me and my work in qualitative, is that these have been the principles for qualitative analysis from the beginning. And so it's quite lovely and affirming to see these principles now adopted by statisticians.
Amazing. I can see why you you have this crush on this new example. Oh, sorry, just jumped ahead here. Let me. So those are great examples, and I know in the book you have a lot more. And when we talk about the workshops in the autumn, we get to go into some of these in more depth, including having doing evaluations. We have multiple principles in place, some of which have to be understood in relation to each other. Some of them create tensions. But before we do that, you affirm that this is a niche. We get excited about these new methods, but you confirmed it's a matching exercise. What can you just confirm what the niche is for DE, not DE, for principal focused evaluation, and maybe instances where we should try and avoid it?
Well, the niche I like to describe as principles focused evaluation is for principles driven people doing principles based work. And so principles focused evaluation helps people who are operating on principles and are working on the basis of principles find out how well they're doing, their degree of adherence to what they say they are operating on, and what results from it. So it provides direction, but not detailed prescription, grounded in values about what matters, based on evidence about how to be effective, but must be interpreted and applied contextually, requires judgment and application, should inform choices at forks in the road, can be a rudder for navigating complex dynamic systems. It clearly points to outcomes and impacts, and can be evaluated for both process, implementation, that is adherence, and the results. So where people are finding that they're talking about principles and values, where they're finding they're needing to adapt what they're doing to different people, to different communities, to different situations, where one size doesn't fit all, adaptation needs to be guided by something. And so if you're in a space of adaptation, of adjustments, of where one size doesn't fit all, and you still need to have some guidance about how to do that, that may well tell you that this is a niche for principles activity, principles programming, principles movement, and principles focused evaluation.
And it really it strikes me that we can also turn back to utilization focused evaluation to remind ourselves that if the primary users of the evaluation aren't thinking principles all the time, there's very little value in trying to convince them that they should think that way, never mind want a principle focused evaluation. If they're not there, they're not there.
That's right.
Yeah. This is a great, I didn't know you were a Downton Abbey fan, but just remind us of why this is so important to remember.
Well, it's partly beyond the humor of this, is to think about the shadow side of principles, There are people that are put off by the idea of principles, that think they're highfalutin, that think they're too abstract, that don't resonate to the word. And so it's, as you said, I'm not trying to proselytize that everything ought to be principles focused. The way I came to this was, as I've come to each of the things I've done, is having clients, people I'm working with, primary intended users, leaders of organizations, leaders, social innovators, who were very principles driven and saying, all the stuff that evaluation does is not resonating to my work that's principles driven. I don't want to do a logic model. I don't want to be aiming at SMART goals. Don't you have something else that will really resonate with how we're doing our work? And principles focused evaluation came from that. But as you said, if leaders don't resonate to it, if you're in what's called simple space, where logic models and theories of change and SMART goals really work, then that's fine. But if you're dealing adaptive work in complex systems, then principles are likely to provide guidance in a way that is meaningful in that space and to people working in that space. And that's where this came from.
Yeah, it's a great reminder of niche or niche, as you say, and the need to be situationally appropriate and match appropriate methodologies and stances and evaluation to the situation. So just one more orientation in the field of evaluation to draw from, particularly relevant in complex situations. Now, Michael, you've been doing this for 18 months now. You threw that book out to the world and you interacted with people on it. We've got two more questions before we get to questions from the group. I'm wondering if you can just go over the things that you have learned in the last 18 months after engaging with the world on this profound idea.
Well, thank you. I am on a learning journey myself. Developmental evaluation, which came out in 2011, it's nearly a decade old, has really been taken up by a lot of people to become a major alternative in evaluation. And I'm finding that it is often principles focused. In the original book and in the case exemplars book that came out in 2015, we were talking some about principles, but as I've dealt more and more with developmental evaluation, because it involves social innovation in complex spaces, the work is very much principles focused. And I wasn't as aware of that deep connection as I have become over the last 18 months. I'm finding a lot of resonance to principles internationally, because there are, as I've traveled around different parts of the world, people are finding that this allows them, especially in the space of innovation and complexity, to not be caught up in what they find as relatively oppressive compliance trappings of program logic models, of the paperwork and the rubrics that come with evaluation, that people working in highly value-based situations, and especially in culturally specific kinds of innovations, are appreciating principles. So in the Canadian context, there's work in the First Nations Aboriginal community around the principle of two-eyed seeing, seeing with one eye with indigenous knowledge and seeing with the other eye with scientific knowledge, and the integrative principle of two-eyed seeing. That's resonating with people. And finally, just this year, the American Evaluation Association is organized in topical interest groups, people who share an interest, quantitative methods or education, public health, philanthropy, data visualization. There's a group of evaluators who are interested in systems evaluation. And they've spent the last 2 years developing principles for doing systems evaluation. The American Evaluation Association has also, in the last 2 years, gone through a process of revising the guiding principles for evaluators. And so principles apply not only to programming, to social innovators, but principles apply to how we do evaluation. Brad Cousins and colleagues in Canada have developed principles for collaborative evaluation. David Fetterman has principles for empowerment evaluation. There are overarching AEA guiding principles for all evaluation, and the systems people have identified 4 overarching principles for systems-based evaluation. So principles apply not just out to people acting on the world, but they apply to guide evaluation dealing with complexities in the world.
Yeah, Michael, this is so amazing, and I know that you did this primarily from the with evaluation being the entry point, but we've discussed it. It's hard not to think about the value of this as an innovator, a change maker, a strategist as well. The power of principles, and after reading your book and spending some time with you, watching you do the workshops, it's hard not to see principles everywhere now. And good ones and bad ones, and to judge them and to think about their importance. So it really feels like the right kind of thinking at the right time. But it's not over. This is sort of rear view stuff that you've learned in the last 18 months. You're also working on other things and seeing how principle-focused evaluation might be useful moving forward. And I'm wondering what you think the future is for principle-focused evaluation, or at least another frontier.
Well, as you know, being one of only 3 people who've actually read the new book, I've written a book called Blue Marble Evaluation that is based on principles. It will be out in November, be launched at the American Evaluation Association meeting in Minneapolis in November. And Blue Marble is a reference to this iconic image of the Earth from outer space, from the Apollo mission in 1972. And the idea of blue marble evaluation is creating a group of evaluators who can be invited to the table for people doing global transformation initiatives. Those initiatives are emerging all over the place because of the climate change crisis, because of pollution of air and oceans and land, the Sustainable Development Goals, equity issues, and these global issues that people are taking on. We need to have evaluation be able to play a role, be invited to the table, and help people engaged in such initiatives achieve what they're trying to do or improve what they're doing and develop it. And so principles-focused evaluation is the basis for what I'm calling blue marble evaluation. Blue marble evaluation includes principles like looking at being truly global, not being tied down to nation states, connecting the local and the global together. And so the blue marble evaluation approach is a set of principles for engaging in evaluation around global transformation. And that approach is entirely based upon the work that's come out of principles-focused evaluation. So I'll be working with people at RDM who are trying to bring about global systems change and global transformation using principles-focused evaluation as a basis for doing blue marble evaluation.
Well, Michael, it is a terrific book, and organizing the ideas around principles is what made it so accessible and an intimidating topic, quite frankly. Working from a blue marble orientation, but made much more accessible because of principles. It got really good resonance when you presented this via webinar in our session 10 days ago in Ottawa. And I know that you're having a formal launch of the book at the AEA session in November in St. Paul. Is that correct?
That's right. It'll be at Wednesday night following the initial reception, and anybody's welcome to come.
When is the book itself available, and how would people get it?
It will be from Guilford Press, and it should be out in very early November. And it will be available at a discount when it first comes out from Guilford. It will immediately be available from Amazon, and we'll be sure that the people on this network know about it.
Yeah, we will, and we're also going to be doing a session with you in November, I believe, as well.
Right.
On it. Well, listen, this again, you produced this 18 months ago. You've interacted with a lot of people since. The thinking, the why of this has clearly resonated with people, and the how continues to get more coherent and better and more applications. So I thank you for giving us an update on this. I know through Duncan's, who's facilitating this, that we have some very good questions online, and thankfully we have time for some of those questions. So why don't we turn over now to you, Duncan, to manage the Q&A period, and then we'll wrap up.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Michael, for sharing with us. Our first question comes from Diane. Diane asks, I heard Michael say a good way to know if you have a meaningful principle is to be able to articulate its opposite. Could you please explain this a bit further? And does it mean that if you can articulate its opposite, then it is meaningful or not meaningful?
Thank you. Yeah, so a principle is meant to provide guidance. And one of the ways that you know that you actually have guidance is when you can identify what the alternative guidance is. Mark was involved in a major program, anti-poverty program across some 15 communities in Canada, and they articulated a set of 5 principles. And actually, in articulating the principles, built into the statement of the principle what they were not doing. And so their first principle, and Mark, I'll ask you to go through these, but as I recall, the first principle was to actually reduce poverty, not alleviate the symptoms of poverty. So that's a clear difference. One principle is be sure you're reducing poverty. A contrary principle is to help people alleviate the symptoms of poverty. And so in the principle itself is articulated the thing that they're not doing. But a good test of principles is comparing things like zero tolerance being trauma informed. Mark, perhaps you'd talk a bit about how the Vibrant Communities principles, and they're available online. Each of them is articulated as we're going to do this and not this.
Well, in fact, I do think they're online, Michael, so maybe I won't go through all 5 of them, but they were about being multi-sectoral. Well, yeah, I will go through being multi-sectoral in our approach rather than have organizations working on their own or in silos, being comprehensive in thinking and action rather than just dealing with fragmented parts of the challenge, emphasizing ongoing learning and change rather than a plan the work the plan approach to tackling things, being very open to learning. And the final one, which was build on community assets rather than focus on deficits and polarized debates. And in fact, Michael, had you written this book, or had we had this book when we did Vibrant Communities, I think it would have been really productive for us because we probably would have updated the principles a little bit based on learning. But we for sure would have adapted the last one because in retrospect, we never really used the last one. It was never entirely meaningful for us, or at least the way it was framed. And we didn't really have a device or a process to help us upgrade those. So in retrospect, principle focused evaluation would have been a high value piece of work for us in that 2001 to 2011 period.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for that. Our next question comes from Ralph. Ralph asks, is there anything about a principle that gives it a positive valence? That is there anything about applying this methodology that guarantees that it moves in a direction that a random sample of people would agree, which is socially beneficial?
Well, thank you, Ralph. I think that's part of the question. So you can evaluate principles-focused evaluation, and we ought to be doing that. There are things to learn about how to do it. That's the reason I did the book. It's a big book because there's a lot to learn, a lot of different kinds of applications, and like any tool. And any approach, it can be misused. It can be done badly. It can actually cause harm if it's poorly done. So there's nothing about principles-focused evaluation that ensures a positive valence, as you said. And principles um, can be express different kinds of value. So the white supremacist movement is principles based. Make whites supreme. Treat whiteness as the ultimate thing to be valued. Make sure that whites retain power and privilege. Those are principles. And so principles can be used for good or for ill. And the value piece of this, the guiding principles for evaluation actually call upon us to examine principles in terms of their contribution to a better world, to the better society. And that we as evaluators have an obligation to look at how programs are supporting sustainability and equity and contributing to the greater good. But principles can be used to support very negative actions. Apartheid was based upon both principles and rules. So there's nothing inherently positive about principles.
Yeah, excellent. Great, Duncan. We've got several more questions. These are really good. Let's see if we can knock off a couple more.
Yeah, they keep coming in, and that's excellent. So if you've been sitting on a question, please feel free to send it out. Our next question comes from Kathy. They write, the book has quite a large section on free air. I'm intrigued how you see the distinction between principles-focused evaluation and action research.
Action research, in my perspective, is a problem-solving approach that looks at things that are occurring within a system and tries to figure out how to solve those problems. It's very very pragmatic. There are principles of action research. Not everybody agrees on what those principles are, but there are also steps for action research, and there are guidance on action research that doesn't involve principles. So I think that you can take any number of kinds of approaches and examine the extent to which articulating and elucidating the principles may be helpful. I've now articulated principles for utilization-focused evaluation. I'm currently revising that book. And in the original 4 editions, I didn't express utilization-focused evaluation in terms of principles. I'm now doing that. And so it's not that action research serves a very different purpose than evaluation may, and it's useful to bring principles to bear in action research is going to be a matter of how you're approaching it. But not all principles-focused evaluation is trying to solve short-term problems, which is most of what action research is trying to do. The blue marble principles are about transforming global systems. They're not about solving immediate short-term problems, which is most of what action research is.
Yeah, excellent.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Godwin. They ask, if a principle is not meaningful to those to whom it is meant to provide guidance, but it is here to, is that an issue?
Yes, that's a beautiful statement of what sometimes happens, where a compliance mentality is happening, and the odds are in that situation that the principle is being treated as a rule, that people are being forced to follow something. And if you're being forced to follow something, the odds are that it's not really being done as a principle, it's being done as a rule.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We just have a couple more questions here. Next question is from Diane. How can principles-focused evaluation relate to evaluating community engagement initiatives?
Mark, you've got a lot of experience with that. Let me tee that one up for you first, and then I'll see what I might pick up on.
Sure. Well, in fact, the moment I saw that question, I must admit that I thought immediately of a group in Ontario, and I've forgotten their name, that was really emphasizing community engagement as a craft required for, at a minimum, public institutions in Canada, and they borrowed heavily from the Australian experience. And they developed a set of principles that they used to assess different public engagement consultations on public policy issues, all the way from, you know, just informing people of certain events to empowering them, working with them to empower them, citizens, to tackle different issues. And they actually had, I believe it was 5 or 6 principles that they used to do assessment before PFE was introduced, Michael, formally. And I recounted reading something on their, there was something about changing the electoral first past the post system, a consultation on that. And it was one of the most magnificent evaluations I've ever seen on a complex issue like that. So yeah, to the extent that community engagement is complex and enough to be principle driven, I think it's an excellent candidate.
I would agree, and it's a place where the principles-focused evaluation helps see if the rhetoric meets the reality. So there's often a lot of rhetoric around community engagement that's either values-based or principles-based, that the community engagement is authentic, it's inclusive, it's meaningful to people, and those are evaluable things. Do people actually perceive it as authentic? Do they perceive it as inclusive? Do they feel engaged in a meaningful way? So principles-focused evaluation provides guidance about evaluating what the criteria are for meaningful community engagement.
Well, and Duncan, I know we have one more question here, but it also amplifies, or at least presents the opportunity for principle-focused evaluation to really be a powerful learning tool. So what I remember was so compelling about that evaluation is they said, well, here's the principle, but here's how it was manifested in this context. And I just found that I learned so much about how a group in a particular context with particular skills dealing with a particular issue took that principle seriously and did something. It was such a learning experience. Principle-focused evaluation for me is a wonderful device that way. Here's a principle. What does it look like in practice? And I know in vibrant communities, you know, we learn things. Comprehensive thinking and action. Well, I think we uncovered that there was at least five archetypical ways to be comprehensive in a poverty reduction strategy. We had no idea. We knew the principle. We didn't know its manifestation, but being systematic in assessing that is unavoidably a learning experience. That's for me the thrill of PFE.
Wonderful. Thank you both for those thoughtful responses. We just have time for one final question, and it comes from Shakira. And they ask, is principles-focused evaluation teaching being offered so that we can utilize it in our own programs and projects?
Mark?
Well, we're going to end with a note, Shakira, about some training we're offering with Michael in September. But Michael, we don't know if Shakira is located close to any of the sites we're going to be at. So maybe you can open up by sharing how you can be connected with on this, or perhaps you're providing other training, and then we'll zoom in on what we're doing in the autumn with you.
I am doing this under the developmental evaluation guide, the Evaluators Institute. I'll be doing a 2-day workshop in July on developmental evaluation, which will include almost a full day on principles-focused evaluation as a part of that. I'll be doing pre-conference workshops for the American Evaluation Association in mid-November on principles-focused developmental evaluation. And that's the way that the training is now coming forward. is connecting principles-focused and developmental evaluation. Those are the two main public opportunities coming up in addition to the ones you're describing.
Thanks, Michael. Well, listen, I thank you for the time we spent today. Duncan's going to mention what we're doing in autumn, but Michael, it was a real enjoyable time connecting again on this yet another orientation to evaluation, which simply improves the probability that evaluation can be useful to people trying to solve some of the most pressing problems of our time. Evaluation always seems to be catching up to innovators, and it feels like we've caught sight of them again, at least for a moment, with principle-focused evaluation. So thanks again for your time and for having the relentless commitment and courage to produce something like this.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks again to both of you for guiding us throughout this conversation. As Mark mentioned, we are excited to announce that we do have a learning opportunity. If you are interested in going further into this idea of principles-focused evaluation for community change makers specifically. So we're just launching this event this week, and you're the first group of people to hear about it. And it's going to be taking place across 3 dates in September in London, Ontario, Toronto, and Montreal. This is a very special opportunity that we're thrilled to be able to offer. And it's a series that will explore principles-focused evaluation approach and how to demonstrate its relevance and application in a wide range of settings. Mark, did you have any comments or anything else you wanted to mention about this opportunity?
No, we've done it once 18 months ago. I think we did 4 cities, and we're doing it again because we've got good, authentic demand for it. So it'll be some of the same basic ideas as explored in the first round, but there's clearly upgrades that are going to be involved, and we've touched on some of those today. Looking forward to it.
And as Mark mentioned, we had a really positive response to this workshop the first time around. And if you enjoyed this webinar but felt like you just needed more time to dig into specifics, to get more tools into your hands to work with as you leave, this is a great next step for you, especially if you're in the area around these 3 dates. So I encourage you to take a look at your post-webinar email that you'll get tomorrow, because we'll have a link for you to sign up for this before it goes wider to the public, just because these did sell out last time around. We do have one more event to talk about, and it's the Community Change Festival. So this is an event that we launched last year in Toronto, and it focuses on the 5 interconnected practices that Tamarack has identified that are essential for effective community change. So evaluating impact is one of those 5 pillars, along with collective impact, community engagement, collaborative leadership, and community innovation. And so the whole design of the Community Change Festival is built around equipping you with tools and principles and resources around those 5 practice areas so that you can go home to your community and create an impact. So I encourage you to take a look at the website on the screen or just tamarackcommunity.ca, where you'll see much more information about the Community Change Festival. And that's taking place September 30th to October 3rd in 2019 in Vancouver, BC. In a few days, you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include a link to the full audio recording of today's call, as well as the learning opportunities I've just mentioned. You'll also get a full copy of the slides. To learn more about upcoming learning opportunities, including workshops and free webinars like this one, you can visit us at tamarackcommunity.ca. We also encourage you to take a minute to complete a short webinar survey to offer feedback on how you enjoyed today's call. The link will be on your screen as you leave this call. And we really thank you for the time you took to be with us today, but also to fill out that survey. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and thanks to Mark and Michael for your wisdom.